Right now, I got a few words for some of our brothers and sisters in the occupied zone. The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall.
Boys and girls, prepare to be astounded, bedazzled, and otherwise stupefied.
John has a long mustache.
You are now listening to Peace Propaganda.
And we're here for you.
Holy shit! Day 3 of 3 consecutive episodes of Peace Propaganda. This is January 8th, 2015, and I am your host, Adam Elpo, with episode 37 of Peace Propaganda. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode. Can you believe it? Breaking records here every day at the Peace Propaganda Unicorn Double Rainbow Studios. Busting out the old names for the studio, which is funny because I'm actually not even recording in that studio. Frequent listeners may remember my computer is broken, which is why there was a little bit of a snafu on a recent episode where it was showing that episode 35 was like an hour and a half long. It is not. If you listen to it, I promise it is a scant 45 minutes. Still a bit on the long side, but it was good. If you didn't catch it, that was part 2 of the Anarchist postulating what an anarchist society might look like. You know, it did some FAQ on there, so to speak. And then the last one was all about Bitcoin. So, you know, if you're tuning into Peace Propaganda and you're like, hey, what the hell? This show used to be all about Bitcoin. Where'd that go? There you go. Episode 36 is for you. Today, in episode 37, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I like to try to mix it up. Almost every episode seems like I'm trying a different format, you know, because I just love doing the show. So, I do what's fun for me, and I hope it's fun for you. So, for this episode, I'm going to be tackling, well, let me back up. This Saturday, which is, let me check the calendar, will be January 10th, 2015. We're going to have another episode of Peace Propaganda. Can you believe it? Probably not going to be able to do one tomorrow. So it's not going to be 5 days in a row unless I can squeeze in some free time. But that would be awesome, wouldn't it? 5 days in a row. But nonetheless, we're going to have 4 episodes in 1 week of Peace Propaganda. It's a banner week for the show. Anyways, that show, I'm going to have 2 guests on. One is an old favorite, gentleman by the name of Vince, who you may recall was on a previous episode of the show, Vince the Minarchist. And so he's going to be on here with a cohort of his, Steve. It's going to be a 2-on-1 Minarchist versus Anarchist in my own show. That's right. I'm going to be throwing myself in the lion's den. Even though I'm in the comfort of my own recording studio, I will be outnumbered by fellows who believe in the need for a state. So they're going to come at me, I assume, with, what do you call it? Brass knuckles and nunchucks, and they're, because I'm an anarchist, so they got to be ready for the violence. No, it should be a great episode. So to warm up for that, I'm going to come at you guys today with some of my anarchist ninjutsu. I'm gonna be bringing forward some of the common shallow criticisms of anarchism. Okay, and so I'm gonna, of course, where better to start than Salon.com, our old nemesis, people who like to conflate all kinds of terms: anarchist with libertarian, libertarian with Rand Paul, Rand Paul with human. And sorry, you Rand Paul lovers out there, if any of you listen to my show, but no love for him here. You might get some on Saturday, because as I said, they will be minarchists. So I'm gonna be talking about a Salon.com article. It's not super recent, but it's it makes its rounds, and the title of it is "The Question Libertarians Just Can't Answer." And then the subtitle is, "If your approach is so great, why hasn't any country anywhere in the world ever tried it?" Yes. Okay, so I'm going to get into the meat of that article. But first, I want to do a media clip because I haven't been doing enough media clips lately. So this media clip is, well, not just because I haven't done enough, but because it fits. This media clip is from the HBO series John Adams. If you didn't see John Adams, it's worth checking out. It's good. You know, not a lot of political drama shows get into, you know, philosophical arguments about the nature of democracy. So, you know, it was cool to see that. And so I'm going to be showing, I'm going to play right now, like probably the highlight of the whole series as far as I'm concerned. It's John Adams, whom, if you're not familiar with John, maybe you're not from the United States or maybe you just despise history. John Adams is like sort of the state apologist of his time. He was a, you know, revolutionary American and, you know, obviously in the late 18th century. And he was all, you know, big Federalist guy. And he is arguing in this scene with Thomas Jefferson, who is sort of known for a more of an individualist democracy. Jeffersonian agrarianism or Jeffersonian democracy are terms commonly associated with him. And obviously not an anarchist, but had a bit of a libertarian streak, you might say. So here's the clip. It's them arguing about the nature of democracy.
I expect that any constitutional document that emerges from Philadelphia will be as compromised as our Declaration of Independence. I am increasingly persuaded that the earth belongs exclusively to the living, and that one generation has no more right to bind another to its laws and judgments than one independent nation has the right to command another.
But surely the Constitution, as it did with the ones we wrote for our own states, is meant to establish the stability and the long-term legality essential to the continuation of civilized society.
Yes, possibly. But I fear it could prove a breach in the integrity of our revolutionary ideals, through which will pour the forces of reaction.
Dr. Mr. Jefferson's pet topic is not the artful arrangement of political power, but the cordoning off of a space in which no power exists at all. You, sir, you are a walking contradiction.
You're all contradictions, Mr. Adams.
Indeed, yes. And what is government, ultimately, but the putting into effect of the lessons which we have learned in dealing with the contradictions in our own characters?
You have a disconcerting lack of faith in your fellow man, Mr. A, and in yourself, if I may say.
Yes, and you display a dangerous excess of faith in your fellow man, Mr. Jefferson.
That is a perfect segue into what I want to talk about today. Notice how at the end of the clip, the writers have Thomas Jefferson lean on this, I don't know what to call it, this straw man. Is that the right use? This nonsensical argument of, oh, you don't have enough faith in your fellow man. This argument drives me up a wall because it makes no sense. So let me back up. Let me reframe the argument here. What they were saying there was, well, if we have rules passed down from generation to generation, laws codified by a government, then that's the only way to maintain stability. And then Jefferson says, oh, well, surely we'll have stability. And if you don't believe that, then that must mean that you don't have faith in your fellow man. And then that sets up, of course, the star of the show. The show is, of course, for John Adams. That sets up the star of the show to say something very practical, very statesmanly, very diplomatic, very pragmatic, to say, oh, you have a dangerous faith in your fellow man, which is just, that's the easy write-off. It really is. I hear it all the time, and it doesn't take more than a moment's thought to debunk that line of reasoning, because what they're saying there is that if you don't have faith in your fellow man, if you think that man is capable of evil, then then what you need is government, because that is going to curb all of the evils of man. And think about that. Think about it for a moment. What is government made of but people? And if people are capable of evil, then government is capable of evil. In fact, who was it? James Madison wrote in the Federalist. Here I have it. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In forming a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. So that's the contradiction. The contradiction is, if you expect government to control the evils of men, then you can't have a government constituted of men. I'm using old-timey language here. Men and women, of course, of people. Forgive me. And so that I think segues perfectly into this this question libertarians just can't answer. Okay, so this is an article from Salon.com. It was published June 4th, 2013. So it's about, 16, 17 months old at this point. But these arguments, are far older than this article, and they persist into this day. So I'm going to read a little bit from the article just to get us all on the same page, right? So the article begins, why are there no libertarian countries? If libertarians are correct in claiming that they understand how best to organize a modern society, how is it that not a single country in the world in the early 21st century is organized along libertarian lines? So I want to say, as this is me, Adam, again. I want to say, as a predecessor to the rest of this, what we're saying here, I don't necessarily identify as a libertarian, but these arguments, I think, apply to anarchism, to libertarian. I identify sort of as an anarcho-libertarian. So you see where the connection is, right? So the article continues. It's not as though there was a shortage of countries to experiment with libertarianism. There are 193 sovereign state members of the United Nations, 195 if you count the Vatican and Palestine. Wow, so generous of Salon to count Palestine, which have been granted observer status by the World Organization. The capitulation to official declarations of the United Nations. Continues. If libertarianism was a good idea, wouldn't at least one country have tried it? Wouldn't there be at least one country out of nearly 200 with minimal government, free trade, open borders, decriminalized drugs, no welfare state, and no public education system? All right, so I got to read this next part. When you ask a libertarian if they can point to a libertarian country, you are likely to get a baffled look, followed in a few moments by something like this. This is the libertarian talking. While there is no purely libertarian country, there are countries which have pursued policies of which libertarians would approve. Chile, with its experiment in privatized Social Security, for example, and Sweden, a big government nation which, however, gives roles to vouchers in schooling. Wow! What a shitty milquetoast answer by this strawman libertarian. If you asked me why no country has pursued libertarian policies, you would not get such a complete lack of an answer. You wouldn't get a baffled look followed in a few moments by some shitty non-answer. What the hell with Chile? Who points to Chile when asked about libertarianism? Jesus Christ. The height of Chilean libertarianism was under Pinochet. Yeah, the military dictator. And I have no interest in pointing to that. And I say the height of libertarianism just because it followed an outright communist rule and was libertarian in that they allowed private property. Since Pinochet, actually, private property laws have been rolled back and they have nationalized a lot of stuff. So I don't know what the hell they're talking about there. Anyways, this isn't a lesson about Chilean history. I want to talk about a real answer to that question. And a real answer to that question might involve such basic explanations of libertarianism as the fact that governments, no matter the government, always seek to aggrandize their own powers. That's the fundamental argument behind anarchism and that wing of libertarianism. Again, I try to distance myself just because Salon and these other yellow journalist rags try to misappropriate the term to all manner of things. But the point is, libertarianism, as I understand it, which is synonymous with anarchism, which is synonymous with classical liberalism, seeks to limit the role of government in all practical ways, in all practicable ways, I should say, which in my opinion is always. And so if you're asking why wouldn't government functionaries seek to put themselves out of a job, okay, fair enough. You are going to get a baffled look from me. You're going to get a baffled look because I can't even understand where to begin assessing that level of naivete. Of course, no government is going to enact policies which limit government. It doesn't make sense. Even in the United States, there was, it was national news for months, for over a year or two, that the Tea Party was going to sweep in and gut government. And what happened, even when the Tea Party got an unprecedented number of what you might call third-party votes. And they were running under the Republican ticket, but they were quasi-third-party, right? It was the biggest third-party coup since the dawn of the Republican Party. And what did they do as soon as they got into Congress? Jack shit. Jack shit. That's because the kind of assholes who run for Congress are exactly the kind of assholes who would never vote for something that would get them out of a job, or that would reduce the perceived need for them to have a job. That's the whole point. That's why the year by year, any given government handout just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, no matter if the problem is actually getting solved. So there's my answer to why a government wouldn't enact libertarian policies. And I would like to add that there have been, and there currently are, historical examples of anarchist cultures. Many Native American tribes, it is thought, operated in a very anarchist way, and not even sort of an anarcho-libertarian way. Many Native American tribes had very different conceptions of what property were that were, very interesting. I, as you know, am a propertarian anarchist, but that's the beautiful thing about anarchism, is that if me and my propertarian anarchists live over here as propertarian anarchists, you can live over there as, leftarchists, or, the way that the Native Americans might have conceived of property. And we're not going to try to proclaim this monopoly on violence over you. You're free to live in that way. And a core tenet of my philosophy is that I would never, ever support anything which tried to impose my philosophy upon you. If you want to live in a tree hugging, like stereotyping communist scenario, go for it. What the hell do I care? It doesn't matter. That's the complaint. That governments do the exact opposite. Okay, so there's one example. The Native Americans lived very similar to that. If you want a more modern example, moving forward in history, not exactly modern, but moving forward in history, you see the medieval Irish actually lived for hundreds of years in a very, 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 very anarchist society. They, in fact, were propertarian anarchists. They believed in owning not only objects but also owning land. And there are actually no known examples of medieval Irish like what would be like the example of like a robber baron in medieval Ireland. There was nothing like that, because there was no way for for people who became wealthy to then what would you call that, like transfer that wealth into violent oppression, which is exactly what government is. That is what the state does. It is a mechanism whereby the wealthy and the well-connected transfer their wealth and power into violent oppression to keep people from competing with them. That's what the worst of the robber barons did in the United States. They got rich, and then they turned around and they paid off congressmen to pass regulations to keep people from competing with them. Regulation is violent oppression. Okay, so let's move forward in history. We have a completely modern example of Somalia. Oh, sure, everybody says, oh, you don't believe in government? Why don't you move to Somalia? Well, if I lived in any of the countries surrounding Somalia, I just might do that, actually, because every international agency, both government and non-governmental, has shown time and time again that Somalia outperforms all of the countries around it since its government collapsed. So if you look at Ethiopia, if you look at Djibouti, if you look at Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, especially South Sudan and Sudan, for God's sakes, Yemen, Eritrea, pardon my pronunciation, I don't speak French, Rwanda, of course, and then, you kind of go west from there, maybe less applicable. Somalia, of course, is on the eastern coast, the Horn of Africa. If you look at the countries that surround Somalia, and then you look at Somalia after the collapse of their government, Somalia way outpaced them in basically every measurable way. You're talking about infant death. You're talking about violent crime. You're talking about longevity of life. You're talking about quality of life, pretty much however measured. Talking about even things such as TVs owned per capita, refrigerators owned per capita, internet access, cell phone access, both in terms of cell phones in your hand as well as network access. Across the board went up after the violent criminal regime of Somalia's government collapsed. Okay? So, of course, you're not going to compare Somalia to San Francisco. Like that's insane. That is a complete ridiculous straw man. Somalia is not going to turn into San Francisco the day after their government collapses violently. Since the collapse of the Somali government, there have been between 6 and 9 governments that have popped up in Somalia, basically competing, warring factions, which are supported by the surrounding governments as well as the United Nations. These powers are playing off of each other. So hardly an ideal test case for anarchism. Nonetheless, even after the first of these so-called governments popped up about 4 years ago, Somalia is still outpacing the nearby regions. So I'm calling that a win. Let's move forward, because as I said, Somalia now is under the control sort of governments. Let's move forward to Zomia. Yes, Zomia. Let's look at Zomia, the stateless geography in Asia. Yes, Zomia is a term coined by historian Willem van Schendel. Forgive me, I don't speak German either. Schendel. The University of Amsterdam. And we're talking about a massive, massive area in Southeast Asia, which has historically been beyond the control of governments. For a quick primer on Zomia, because I don't want to read the whole thing here to you, but check out the Wikipedia page. I'm a big fan of Wikipedia, and you can see, if nothing else, see the map. I'll link it in the show notes, because we're talking about just a mind-bogglingly large space, about the size of India. Yeah, it's actually looks like it's probably a little bigger than India. And if you're not familiar, India is rather large. One of the biggest countries on Earth. So it's not even known how many people live in Zomia, but it is a vast mountainous region which has resisted the Chinese government. It's resisted the Thai government. It's resisted, and then go back in history, it's resisted the Mongols, which is quite a feat. And these are people who, by all accounts, have no interest in living with government trappings. Okay. There's a quote. Okay, so I'm reading here from Wikipedia. That they say the tribes in Zomia are conscious refugees from modernity itself, choosing to live in more primitive, locally based economies. And then they quote a book. Hill tribes seen from the valley kingdoms as our living ancestors, what we were like before we discovered wet rice cultivation, Buddhism, and civilization. Let me pause right there. Before Buddhism. So we're talking about cultures which have existed for what, like 6,500, 7,000 years? Okay, continuing. Before they discovered those, are on the contrary best understood as runaway fugitive maroon communities who have, over the course of 2 millennia, been fleeing the oppressions of state-making projects in the valleys, slavery, conscription, taxes, labor projects, epidemics, and warfare. So these are people who intentionally avoid those things, and rather than live in a world of iPhones and in high-speed trains, trade that to not live in a world of slavery, conscription, but I repeat myself, taxes, but I repeat myself, and warfare. That is damn enviable. Not that I want to go live in a tent necessarily, but that is really impressive. And it warms my heart to know that there are so many people on Earth that see the evils of the state and say, no, that's not for me. I don't want slavery, conscription, taxes, epidemics, and warfare. I would rather live in a tent in the mountains of rural China. Yes, exactly. So, Salon.com. Why aren't there governments that are libertarian? It's because governments can't be libertarian. That's why. So, that concludes this episode of Peace Propaganda. I hope you enjoyed it. And, I'm sorry, there is an epilogue to this episode of Peace Propaganda, actually, because I had a little bit of feedback on the last episode already, the episode that aired yesterday. And I wanted to get into that just for a minute here. I had a post on Google Plus. Like I said on the last episode, please feel free to search for me on Google Plus, where I am now. I would say primarily going to be doing my show stuff on Google Plus. Okay, so a gentleman from Oregon named Ivor posted a rather long response to my Bitcoin episode, and I'm not going to read it all, but I will read a bit of it here. And it begins with Adam. The what can I do with Bitcoin question is currently rather frustrating. To date, from the casual user's perspective, Bitcoin seems an investment, and headlines are screaming with worst investment of 2014 and a very dishonest, myopic, and snapshot that ignores its incredible 2-year return on investment. That's true. That's very true, Ivor. Especially because the giant, there was a uphill, what would you call it? Roller coaster that began just before New Year's 2014. So, I mean, it was just like a ramp up that coalesced right around New Year's 2014. And then, it's kind of gone back down to where it was in 2013. So yeah, I mean, if you look at just the year 2014, it was the downward slope of that ramp up. But that's like Ivor says here, it's dishonest. It's myopic. You know, span it to 2013 and 2014, and we're actually still up. So he mentions a couple things. He says some things to say to skeptical friends. I like this list a lot. Using Bitcoin protects you from identity theft and fraud that is inherent with the legacy system. And with Bitcoin, you manage your own money. You have at your fingertips parallel money system that's open 24/7, 365, and can't be hacked, inflated at a whim, confiscated, shut down, and won't charge you monthly, yearly renewal fees. That's a big deal, right? I mean, if you've been following the news for a while, you may remember, I think it was 2005, 2006. It hit the news cycle for a few months. It was very popular in the liberal progressive circles, the predatory loans and what banks were doing, especially in terms of, if you overdrew your account, banks would hit you with a big hit and then these like payday loan schemes. Nothing like that in Bitcoin. Can't overdraw your Bitcoin account. And then he even specifically says for your liberal-minded skeptics, you might discuss how micropayments and tips can revive revenue streams for distressed artists, musicians, writers, bloggers, journalists, and authors. Check out BitTunes, which is in beta. I highly recommend you check out BitTunes, actually. It's a very cool-looking project. The idea of, exchanging micropayments for music. ChangeTip, BitShares Music in development, and probably lots more. Yeah, he's probably right. Actually, I know of one more, which is a program for Afghan woman bloggers. Women in Afghanistan who can't normally have money are getting micropayments from around the world for blogging, basically from the front lines of this like horrifying, oppressive gender war. Very cool stuff. I'll try to find a link for that and put it in the show notes for you. He continues, Bitcoins and crowdfunding are made for each other. This is economic growth from the ground up. I've talked about that a lot on the show, crowdfunding with Bitcoin. The idea that currently it's illegal if you want to try to do a crowdfunding as far as selling shares to a new company. The FCC will come down. I'm sorry, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, will come down on you for general solicitation. And they'll throw you in jail. I mean, they do it. And Bitcoin allows you to do that anonymously, which, fuck yeah, right? Censorship resistant. You may recall WikiLeaks had a big deal where they were censored. I still don't use PayPal because PayPal capitulated to government censorship regimes. And then lastly, he says Bitcoin is 21st century programmable money with self-regulating trust that is built in. Things like decentralized ride-sharing, Lazuz, etc. can be done with Bitcoins without permission. Yes, very cool. There's a lot of very interesting self-regulating mechanisms that are emerging through Bitcoin. Things like third-party, what do you call it? I'm blanking, I'm sorry, but a mechanism whereby a third party needs to authorize the release of payments. And so, okay, that's it. I just wanted to hit on that very, very briefly because I thought Ivor had a lot of valuable things to contribute to the conversation. So thank you, Ivor. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. I think we've already established in this episode that I am really bad at pronouncing anything that isn't totally Anglo or Greek because I'm Greek. So that does it for episode 37, January 8th, 2015. Goodbye.
To survive.